So great. So I wasn't sure exactly where this was going to go. So a quick sum up just for others coming in late. I quickly summarised that my work in the Murray-Darling Basin for Colin's benefit, and the fact that I've been working with the Faith Ecology Network and the Sisters of Mercy from the Rahamim Ecology Centre, which were based around the Bathurst and Sydney region here. And I was just talking about the dynamics of the renegade nuns and others that were doing amazing work in the eco-social space. Claire, I'm just going to dip just briefly into the horizontal elements of coherence there around. You will have seen the anatomy of a social network type diagrams where there's a closeness element. There's people that can brokerage or broker between groups. So there's people that might belong to two groups. The wide bridges concept is when you've got more connection than less connection. So it's not just one place, but you've got some redundancy. If you can throw a boundary around it, then you can build trust within a cluster. But then there's quite often the inside and outside type politics. Do we trust those inside? Do we not? And then the betweenness thing is that there may be another adjacent possible network that nobody's aware of until somebody comes along and drops in the middle and goes, "Oh, have you looked over the other side of the fence with another group, and they're doing something similar to us." And then the first reaction normally is, "Oh, they must be competitors." And so you've got to have somebody that's taking the helicopter perspective that can actually say, "No, actually, why don't we collaborate?" And so that a brief overview of some of the network dynamics type elements. And then the other one that I developed a few years ago, which was based a bit more on aerodynamics, was this one, which is the concept of different horizontal layers. And in spiral dynamics, this is more the blue layer, which is a bit like the traditional institutions, including churches. We do what we're told, we follow, the script, and there's an overarching leader or leadership team that makes that all happen. The entrepreneurial is more thinking for gain. It's more individual rather than collective. The green groups quite often are more communitarian, but they collaborate within the group, but they quite often compete without the group, outside the group. And often that's around grants or other things, and they don't realize that they're doing it. But they have to put each other down in public and have to be careful to not share their resources, because if we told them what we were doing, then we might lose the grant. And so that's a killer in any community. Then there's the system thinking for competitive gain, and that's quite often your political apparatchiks or your systems thinkers that have gone into consultancy that can now see the rest of the system and start to use it and manipulate it for their own good. And then there's the ethical, collaborative whole systems thinking, which is getting close to the current peak of consciousness, if you want to use that word, in terms of how you can get these groups to work. And so the point I was making here was any individual can be behaving at one or more levels depending on their life conditions and systems context. So you might go to church on Sunday, be a businessman, be part of a conservation group, but also there's a layer below this red, which is a bit more warlike, tribal. You could be a hockey player that beats people around the head with a stick, or a boxer in the ring, or something very competitive. And so it's not that you are only in one of these, but when you are with these networks, this is the way you tend to behave. So any network can be behaving at one or more levels depending on their life conditions and systems context. It's very hard to have transformative thoughts if you're being chased by a guy with a machete, which is where Claire would have understood that from the South African perspective. It's great to have these beautiful thoughts, but if you can't keep the people that are going to kill you outside the enclosure, then it's going to be very hard to keep having these theological thoughts. And then an individual person with the same content knowledge can be behaving at one or more different levels depending on the intent of their networks. And this is when you potentially reach your glass ceiling, Claire. If you can see, I could use exactly the same knowledge and get a better outcome if they would let me do this, but they can't see that yet. And so, and the final point, any individual can be encouraged to behave at different levels depending on their networks. So the vertical coherence element here is a critical thing. If you've got somebody that can move up and down this spiral or this staircase and bring their gifts in different story languages, depending on how it goes, and like Indigenous story would do that as well. if you can bring the same message but with different levels of language and different language for the groups that you're with, then you can be very influential in the vertical sense. So that, and you can see there's a horizontal coherence element, but there's also a need for vertical alignment. So then when I go to the diagram I showed you last night, on the Joe Brewer and Penny Hypel Design School for Regenerating Earth, the thing that I encountered, and this, I shared this with one of the Faith Ecology Network events, they were telling me, and I related this a little bit to Theory U with the going into the U, letting go, visiting source, letting come. And when I started to map these elements against that recognition of the problem, reframing the purpose, enlisting and harnessing change agents. But then when my eco-spiritual friends were telling me, well, it wasn't just Pope Francis, there was the Vatican II, there was eco-spiritual movements, and then Pope Francis has come in. And when I looked at that against their faith organization membership trend, some of it, as you said, Colin, because the church is losing its luster, but also developmentally, people are in a different stage globally, so they don't necessarily seek that sort of self-organizational structure as much anymore. There's a need for a recalibration of the narrative, an early adoption of the narrative, and a revisitation of older narratives, which is what the Faith Ecology Network was doing. It was saying which of the stories we currently have still makes sense in the context of this new science, which is really important. How do we retell that old story with the new science incorporated? And then there's the awakening and outreach that starts to attract more secular interest. But if they didn't do that, then I could see the numbers, dwindling. Several of the orders that I knew actually closed shop and went into retirement homes because they'd said, we've done our job here. The Benedictine monks, I think it was in Sydney, had been there for 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years or something, and then decided, no, that's enough, and they just closed shop. On the other side, you've got the ecological destruction trend that's being named by multiple religions. And when you start to dig into what they say, they also recognize separation, social complexity, capitalism, worldviews, narrative relevance, etc. And so the question then became, and this is where it relates back to where I think the three of us are at in terms of engaging with these communities. And as you said, Claire, genuine communities. They get community very deeply. I think what they're looking for is how to better retell the story in systems context that makes sense in today's current context. So that could be bringing in science, it could be bringing in climate change, it could be bringing in collapse, depending on how deep they're ready to go. And it could be actually enabling the education of a core group of people who are used to having their education handed down to them from a higher source. So you've got potentially a network of people that could work together and are already closely connected with communities. And if it's the same in Canada as it was in Australia, quite often these eco-spiritual sisters in particular had deep connections with the Indigenous communities. And so they had walked with and grieved with the Indigenous communities, and they shared common causes around water and capitalism and poverty and various other things with those. And so they knew about colonialism, they knew the impacts of it. And so the potential solutions that then come out of that are greater nature connectedness, giving resources to those that are doing it, collaborative development, increased systems awareness, renewing the narrative, trans-faith collaborations, eco-spiritual education, and connection with secular system ethics. And initially, of course, as you know, from the church's perspective, you didn't connect with other churches, you didn't connect with other competing interests. But these days, I think they're much more open to the possibility that the narratives are quite similar from many different walks. So that was the diagram I showed you last night. And then back to the governance, Claire, if I could, diagram that I shared with the Faith Ecology Network people, and I worked, don't have to read all the details here, but basically all of these separate elements of leadership, social network, participation, education and learning, and research and integration get deeper towards integrative practice, towards the center. And so it's not enough just to have one of each color. In terms of the governance, I was arguing that the universal outcomes that they were looking for of compassion and altruism through interconnectedness and oneness needed shifts of perspective of self and relationships, which were more likely the closer you got to integrative practice, where you're influencing decisions. You've got deutero learning, which is double and triple loop learning, transdisciplinary inquiry and research, sustainable entrepreneurship, and transformational leadership. The challenge, Claire, is that the governance is generally not drawn from that group. And so I was playing with, sort of, is this waves of consciousness? And I even found a paper which talked about having looked at the structured interviews to find common factors across religious, spiritual, and modern transformative movements. So I was able to point to research that was actually agreeing with what I was thinking. And then I came back to, which is always nice, isn't it? A bit of confirmation bias doesn't go astray. And then I came back to the Faith Ecology Network and said, well, here's your current leaf-based model: faith community members, admin meetings, science community, animation community, and communication admin. And I said, let's compare it to this. And it's quite similar. And your core steering group should comprise people with relevant skills, values, and the ability to appreciate, if not achieve, integrative practice. In other words, not close the glass ceiling. And so that was a critical element for me, and I was suggesting to them. And I think that's where the key is going to be for you guys. And Colin, this is what I was saying to you before, that it may not be the leader of the religious order in that area. It might be the person that is the renegade within the renegade order, who is the one that's trying to stretch the agenda, push the Overton window. And they're the ones that are probably going to be tuning in to the sorts of events that you're running. And so when you flip that around, instead of you going to them, how do you invite them to you, right? And so what would an event that welcomed multiple eco-spiritual communities or welcomed multiple existing communities into it look like? And what would be the key questions or standing a bit Canadian myself, aren't I? What would be the key hooks that you could build into that? Because they saw me for what I was trying to bring, because they could see that I could hold this integrative practice and wasn't shy to speak with religious people. So they could see I could transdisciplinary, trans-faith, trans-secular versus religion, do that helicopter perspective, and they will be looking for people. And I get the sense that both of you are already in that boat of having that integrative capacity in the middle. And so they need to see you for the value you can bring to them, is the way that I would put that. And let me see if there was something else I was going to mention.
Actually, I would, okay, go
Yeah.
ahead, but I'm dying to bring something in here because it's very exciting to see.
Yeah, so I was playing with a version of this diagram a couple of months ago and got to this point where I think we're at the stage, because I think my sense, Claire, is that the sort of conversation we're having is a conversation that other groups are also going to come up against if they haven't come up against it yet. And so the challenge is, how do we the intention to integrate bottom-up and top-down initiatives, emergence and design, warm data context and hard data, to enable collective navigation of the emerging landscapes with greater dignity as collapse occurs. Right, so that's where we're coming from. And what would it look like to have a strategic partnership alliance, right, with initially a select group of bioregional crow's nest people with sufficiently holistic perspectives and integrative conscious practices to bring truly transformative leadership on behalf of willing regions. And Claire, if I'm correct in reading between the lines of what you've been saying, and I've also heard you say a few other things, there is this element of we're already doing it, which becomes the de facto glass ceiling. We're already doing it. We don't need to do that bit. And it's like, no, can't you see that we can bring exactly the same tools to a different table, and make it a better outcome from the same amount of effort but they don't want to go there yet. So it needs some mechanism to unlock that potential. And that is where the art and the poetry and the prophecy and the story and those things come into play. It almost needs an external from that small group elder to state the obvious in a way that can be heard, and the collective field goes, yes, you're right. Why don't we do that? And then you're going, yes, I've been trying to tell you that. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely, but there's another component, and
Oh,
actually,
of
I would
course there is.
love
Oh, let me
to
write it down.
would love to bring this in because we're just getting ready to try and tell the story, but I think you'll see this right away. And Colin, I hope you don't mind me just jumping in here because it's like right on.
No,
Um,
no, so good.
it is um sort of having gone down the road of trying to sort of bring all those sort of like this wrangling octopus into, just even hearing enough of it so that you can kind of show them some of the pieces which you've laid out brilliantly. Like those are just so helpful. Um, but you're just going to suspend what we've been talking about just for 2 seconds, just to give you some idea of what we've been thinking about, because it brings in all of that thinking, and for the first time, it just suddenly, I don't know, feels like a way through in a way that I couldn't see before, and it's uh, essentially using the principle that the land organizes the people, and that there is coherence once you start to understand the flow of the land. So the bioregional mapping is a really, really critical place to start creating a container of that can also be a shared context, so that you're starting to see the coherence in the landscape. And that sort of is also this very powerful vision that taps into everything you were talking about, Colin, with the earth. It's sort of like really drawing on those pieces. But what we're thinking about with Regenerate Cascadia, and so we've kind of gone through a bit of an iterative process, but I'm super excited about what's coming together, which is inviting, so using the principle of minimum viable process, like what's the minimum we have to do and the minimum amount of people that we need to be connecting with that are sufficiently able to see the larger picture, that are engaged in specific groups that are already networking and organizing. And so I'm thinking, just for example, the people that organize around watershed restoration. They may not actually be all connected because there's maybe multiple streams and what have you in a sort of an eco-regional or regional place. So just something where you can actually gather as physically as a community, and people can actually see that at that scale. And then maybe the watershed groups, maybe the faith communities, maybe the educators, maybe the arts community, like any groups that are working already with each other and where those existing networks of relationship have been built, indigenous communities as well. And so inviting people that have those connections to come, and then so a whole process of them inviting those networks, just a critical mass from those communities in, but having a mentorship, like assembling the Regenerate Cascadia, inviting in mentors that are those people that you were describing, the really I'm going to use the wrong language, the ones at the center of the circle. What was your language there?
Integrative practice.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're to me they're more the transformative thinkers
Yes.
than the actor memorizers.
Mm,
So the actor memorizers can follow the script,
yeah.
and they can dispel disbelief while they do it. The transformative thinkers are saying, "Is this enough? And do we have to rewrite the script?"
Yeah. So they're the knowledge holders and wisdom keepers, but people who are invited. So so having basically that they are able to hear as kind of like a wisdom council, but much more able to also be responsive to the different communities as they're going through an iterative process. So the containers, the bioregional mapping workshop that everyone's invited into. But as they're going through that participatory process, the mentors are actually being involved in in helping sort of to just to kind of iteratively learn what might need to come. But the whole idea is that during that process, we're identifying who are the core teams that need to be identified, who can start holding the process, and what are like a few different priorities you can maybe agree on could be things to focus on. So now you've got something to actually do the work. You've got a team now that are the people that are the weavers and trusted within those fairly diverse groups that are starting to see that they're holding a shared vision. And to me, that whole process can be then reiterated in waves, so that you're just building, but you're not trying to stretch yourself to do too much, but you're bringing in the integrative thinkers that are helping to shape and help everyone as they're going through these learning processes. And you're bringing in governance as well, pro-social and governance piece, so that you're building the governance that's actually required, which will help to, so then you're not trying to fight the existing power structures and governance systems there. You're actually creating a brand new one that now is, and if you can tie that then to basically the bioregional financing facilities, you're starting to actually integrate the rewards of the system into the value flows that are happening. So you're just building the whole DNA from the inside out. So just wanted to share what we're about to launch, and I'm so excited about what is coming together and who is coming together around it.
Love it. And it parallels very much. This is a blurry version of the fruits diagram, which you might have seen before. But the blow-up version of that is very similar to what you've just described, Claire. And this is what I was trying to do in the Murray-Darling Basin. And my learnings were similar to what you've just described, that the prerequisites were some sort of prior engagement or trusted intermediary with cultural legitimacy and social capital,
Yeah.
or there might be people that responded to an expression of interest or a grant. So in my case, how do you identify who you're going to connect with? And the trusted intermediaries, you have to walk in with as a trustworthy person, with somebody that says, trust this man is my brother, right? So that might be a transformative thinker in faith, community or Indigenous elders, respected politicians, long-standing landholders, or even unions, right? You have to be invited into willing communities. And in our case, they were vulnerable communities. So the willing communities recognise they need economic transition and transformative change. They know they need to welcome external change agents to host the processes to get past stuckness. And the vulnerability could be to climate change, flood, drought, food, economic,
Yeah.
more
Yes.
diversified economy. The network of trusted community engagement specialists, educators, facilitators, change agents, deep expertise designers, healers, you just mentioned as well, I think, and mentors, tailored to be as fit for purpose as required on a community by community basis. So it's
Yes.
not, we're going to bring in the entire
No.
team. If you've got people in your community already, how do we give them a common
Exactly.
vision to do the work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
And
meeting them
to
where they're at.
Exactly. Now, the intention of the whole thing is that you've got empowered individuals collaborating in intergenerational communities of co-learning, healing, co-design, and development, and they are mutually creating exemplar, cohesive communities of need and care, operating within better understood, changing, linked social ecological system limits, which is the collapse aware bioregionalism. And this is from 2016, right? And so the arrow back to the trusted network, you're looking for communities with deeper shared understandings of the why, the how, and with whom they can transform. So who do we trust? At the moment, as Joe jokingly said last night, he's the dancing monkey, but he's the one they trust to come in to challenge the existing narrative, to affirm the existing narratives, and to let the system see itself. And that's the only way it can evolve, to let the system see itself evolving and emerging. And then it goes, oh, wow, we're already doing all this great stuff. And so there's a humility that Joe brings to that, because he knows they're already doing a lot of the stuff. It just needs some coherence building, and the coherence has to come from somebody charismatic enough, trusted
Uh,
enough,
yeah.
and conscious enough to be able to speak to people about real shit.
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
who can they trust? Who can they rely on to work with them? And how might they become more whole, viable exemplars for others, connected to a network of others from whom to co-learn? So I don't mean to be big noting, but this was 2016, right? And so I was on the right journey and I was trying to get it there, but I got continually knocked down by me reaching the glass ceiling and being the outsider. And so the humility that I had to bring was the willingness to walk away if things were going
Yes.
pear-shaped. And I
Yes.
had to give people permission to cut me loose because they had to live there and I didn't because I was the outsider,
Yeah.
right? And Joe mentioned this last night. He said that in some contexts now, because he is being so successful at bringing money for other regions, it's now getting hard for him to be seen in the same light within his own region. Why aren't you bringing it for us? And these again are the system dynamics. Sorry, here the system dynamics that if people think they're competing for a small pie rather than actually getting something that was never going to go to anybody else or to them, right? So there's those sorts of challenges. I'm just checking. I think that's most of what I was going to bring. Um, yes, that was most of what I had to bring tonight. Um, so there's a report that I wrote behind this, which was only in draft form, and it got rejected. When the immune system started to spit me out. Um, but I'm happy to share, recommendation 3 with you if that's of any value. Um, so it's that sort of thinking. But I think the other element here is that finding people with um, these levels of skills, and the extra one that I'm adding into there would be collapse awareness and collapse acceptance, um, because you'll find a lot of people that have these skills but don't want to go there. And so the challenge you've got in any innovation community, even industrial innovation, is that if you're not considering the real world context, it doesn't matter how good your design looks on paper, it's probably not going to float, right?
Yeah.
And so the false coherence, and this is the frustration and the cognitive dissonance in a lot of green groups that I know, the levels of false coherence that people settle at that others in their own group can see are not going to be enough for what's coming down the line. And therefore, those people that think they belong to an eco village get spat out because they're challenging too much or have to leave because they know it's no longer secure because the boat isn't designed for the storms that are coming.
Yeah.
And look at what happened, and no criticism, but look at what happened in Asheville and North Carolina. So we're already there, we're doing it, we're safe and we're secure and everything else, and boom, oh shit, And I know people in those communities, and one of the guys was always angry with me for talking about collapse on a forum we were on, and to the point that I actually left the forum because he was shutting me down every time, and now he's celebrating the fact that he's found his long underpants on the top shelf of something that the rest of the house was washed away, and he's found my long undies. Yay! And a week and a half, 10 days later. So this is what's coming, and it's repeat shocks multiple times,
Mm.
and the community resilience is critical. So the horizontal coherence is important, but the vertical coherence to get the highest possible level of systems thinking into this stuff is the thing which is challenged and prevented almost every time. And that's the same dynamic that the renegade sisters have had to experience
Mm.
and that anybody in the conservation group has already experienced. And it's the same governance question. And so I think there's some generic skills here and some generic lessons here and a sort of a train the trainer leadership type thing that could be brought. And just between you and me, and of course anybody else watching the video now, Penny and I and Anne have been talking about what are other things that we could potentially bring as part of the Bioregional Learners Guild, Leaders Guild, sorry, the Bioregional Leaders Guild. I hadn't factored this sort of thinking into that, but it's this sort of thinking which I think will deepen the awareness because it has to be a field that feels this, not an individual you're trying to convince of this, because the individuals can't necessarily go there, but they can ask the next question if they realize everybody else has just gone there and they're wondering, why do these guys get it and I don't? In that moment of asking that question, they're open to learning. But until then, they already know the answer. And that's the challenge. And that's to me the biggest governance challenge that every eco village, every green group that I've belonged to has come up against is the inability for the systems thinking to go to the level required for what's coming down the line.
Yeah. Uh, I'm wanting to let Lee jump
Oh,
in. Actually, Neal, do you want to just switch the screen
Yes.
to put us back so that we can see each other. Oh, is Colin gone?
No,
No.
Colin's still there.
Oh,
No,
Colin, sorry. I was on my phone and sometimes it doesn't.
yeah, no problem.
Um,
Yeah, Neal, that was
I,
really, really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. It was like a fire hose of information, but
Sorry.
it's really stirred the pot and provided a lot of inspiration of, you know, not just in the faith community discussion, but the overall community networking and communications and leadership of it all. So thank you so much for sharing.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening, because the telling changes depending on the context. And that's why I needed to know your context first. And it's so affirming to hear that the dynamics that it sounds like you're experiencing, this could potentially have some value for, because I've been trying to find, where can I bring this understanding? Because most people don't want to hear it. And so we have to get past this. We're all in the same boat, and until we all decide to move forward, we're not going to go anywhere. I think we have to have some sort of transcend to then include version, which actually allows those that can go further faster on behalf of their communities, can be trusted to do so, resourced to do so, and allowed to come back to bring the others forward. And it's not to say you will never have the capacity, the capability, the maturity. It's to say, if you're going to slow us down or stop us from going where we think we need to go, then we're in the wrong place because we can't stay here any longer. So